This week, there's actually two Parshias that we read. They are the two shortest Parshias in the Torah, Nitzavim and Vayelech. Nitzavim coming in at 40 psukim, Vayelech coming in at 30 psukim. We read them combined, and we read them this Shabbos. If you'd like to follow along in the Chumash, I'm going to be reading from Parshas Vayelech. In the Chumashim, it's Perek Lamed Aleph, Pasuk Yud. Perek Lamed Aleph, Pasuk Yud begins with the words Vayetzav Moshe. Vayetzav Moshe. So here's the backdrop. Here's what's going on. Moshe Rabbeinu is nearing the end of his mission in this world. In fact, the Gemara, the rabbis tell us that the entire Chumash Devarim was said in the last 36 days of Moshe's life. Parshias, Nitzavim, and Vayelech themselves are said on the last day of Moshe's life. This is Zayin Adar, the day, so to speak. Atem Nitzavim Hayoim, or in the beginning of Parshas Vayelech, Ben Meya ve'esrim Shana Anoichi Hayoim. It's Moshe's 120th birthday, and he's still speaking, still giving the Jews his last will and testament. In fact, the rabbis explain, of the 613 mitzvahs in the Torah, the last two mitzvahs appear in this week's Parsha, in Parshas Vayelech. We're going to study about them today. They were given by Moshe Rabbeinu on the day of his passing, hours, literally hours before he passes on. So let's begin here, Perek Lamed Aleph, Pasuk Yud. Vayetzav Moshe Oisam Leimer, Moshe commands the Jews, and he gives them the following mitzvah. Miketz Sheva Shonim, he says, at the end of 7 years, B'moyed Shnas HaShmita B'chag HaSukkos, at the conclusion of the Shemitah year, of course, the 7th year, in the Sukkos that follows the Shemitah year, when all the Jews come to encounter, to experience, to be seen by Hashem in the Beis HaMikdash, Tikros HaTorah HaZois, Moshe instructs that this Torah should be read, Neged Kol Yisrael, in the presence of all the Jews, Be'oznehem, in their ears. Hakel es ha'om, gather together the people. Ha'anoshim, the men, V'hanoshim, the women, V'hataf, and the children, V'gercha asher b'sharecha, the convert among you, L'man yishma'u, L'man yilmadu, so that they should learn the Torah and study the Torah, V'yoru es Hashem alakeichem, and fear Hashem, V'shomru lasos es kol divrei HaTorah azois, and that they be sure to keep all of the instructions, all of the mitzvahs of this Torah. So this is the very famous mitzvah of a hakel, that the Jews performed once every 7 years in the Sukkos that immediately followed the Shemitah year, where here the mitzvah was that there should be a gathering of all the Jews. And the Torah articulates that this refers to men, it refers to women, it refers to children, and even gercha asher b'sharecha, which I translated as convert. And the convert in your cities. All the Jews should gather together. What happened at these Hakel gatherings? The Torah itself doesn't give us all the details, but the Mishnah and the Gemara spare no detail. A special wooden platform would be constructed. The king of the Jewish people would seat himself on that platform. A special Sefer Torah was handed to the king by the Kohen Gadol himself. Actually, the Kohen Gadol would take the Sefer Torah while he was standing, and he would then sit down and read from it portions of the Chumash for the Jewish people. And this was done once every 7 years. The most unique part of this mitzvah, obviously, was that the mitzvah necessitated the physical participation of every single Jew, man, woman, and child. If you turn the page, there is one more mitzvah that Moshe Rabbeinu gives the Jews before his passing. This again is in Perek Lamed Aleph Pasuk Yud Tes. A different mitzvah, nothing to do with the mitzvah of Hakel. Va'ata kisvu lochem es hashiro hazois. And now, says Moshe, you, the Jewish people, shall write for yourselves this song. V'lamdos b'nei Yisrael, teach it to the Jewish people. Sima b'fihim, place it in their mouths. L'man tiyali hashiro hazois la'ed b'nei Yisrael, so that this song shall serve as testimony for the Jewish people. If they don't fulfill what's written in the Torah, they should not be surprised if and when, God forbid, they are afflicted with all of the consequences articulated in the Torah. So this here in Pasuk Yud Tes, this is a mitzvah where Moshe Rabbeinu commands the Jews to write down, quote, this song. On a simple level, this song refers to next week's Parsha, Parshas Ha'azinu, that we read actually not next week, but the week after that. On a deeper level, on a halachic level, it's explained that this is one of the 613 positive mitzvahs. In fact, this is the last of the 613 mitzvahs, and it is a positive mitzvah upon every Jew to write a Sefer Torah. Kisvu lachem es hashiro hazois. Every Jew is commanded to write a Sefer Torah. Okay, now let's go through this slowly and patiently. What we have is the two final mitzvahs in the Torah. Second last mitzvah, the mitzvah of Hakel. Once every 7 years, all the Jews had to gather together, men, women, and children in the Beis HaMikdash, where the king himself would read sections of the Torah for the Jews. That's the second last mitzvah. And then the very last mitzvah, which is the mitzvah Kisvu Lachem Es Hashiro Hazois, the last mitzvah of every Jew is obligated to write a Sefer Torah for himself. If you've ever been to a Siyum Sefer Torah, if you've ever been to a Hachnosa Sefer Torah, or in many cases, the mantle, the coat that's made for the Sefer Torah actually has these words written on the coat of the Sefer Torah. That is here, these words again, Perek Lamed Aleph Pasuk Yud Tes, Va'ata kisvu lachem es hashiro hazois. Write for yourselves this song, this Sefer Torah. Again, the pasuk from which we learn that every Jew is obligated to write for themselves a Sefer Torah. Mitzvah number 613. Okay. The commentaries want to know why of all the 613 mitzvahs, these are the last two, instructed by Moshe Rabbeinu to the Jews within the last few hours of his life. Of all the things that Moshe could have concluded with, of all the mitzvahs that Moshe could have made as his grand finish, why these two, Hakel and the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah? In order to understand this, we'll spend a few minutes discussing each of these mitzvahs and some of the specifics involved, and then we'll try to bring it together and explain why these two become the two final mitzvahs. Now, some of you who are listening may be wondering, I've now said 2 or 3 times that the 613th mitzvah is a mitzvah to write a Sefer Torah. And yet, many Frum Jews, or I would say most Frum Jews, do not write Sefer Torahs. All right, so perhaps the commentaries say, it can be argued, you don't need to write the Sefer Torah yourself. You can employ someone else to write a Sefer Torah for you. After all, most of us are not qualified Sofrim. Most of us are not qualified scribes. We wouldn't even know how to write a Sefer Torah. So you don't fulfill the mitzvah by writing a Sefer Torah yourself. You can make a shliach, you can hire someone else to write a Sefer Torah. Okay. But most of us don't do that either. Here you have a community, Baruch Hashem, Kanai Nohara, so many Jews. How many Jews actually have a Sefer Torah written? And even when they do have a Sefer Torah written, it's usually in the memory of a loved one, or in honor of someone, or in honor of a shul, or something like that. But you don't find people, a bar mitzvah bocher, as soon as he becomes obligated in mitzvahs, starting to save up money to write a Sefer Torah. So what actually happened to this 613th, the final mitzvah in the Torah, to write a Sefer Torah? What happened to that? Where and how do we today fulfill this 613th mitzvah. So here there is a very, very famous Rosh that writes that nowadays that we have shuls, and every shul has Sifrei Torah. It's not necessary for every Jew to write their own Sefer Torah, because you can go to shul and there you have in some cases no shortage of Sefer Torahs. It's not necessary. It's not the real meaning. It's not the real meaning of the mitzvah. So what is the real meaning of the mitzvah? The Rosh explains. And again, the Rosh himself lived before the days of the printing press. So it says what it means is that every person in their own private life should write Sforim, of Torah, should write Chumash, should write Mishnayos, should write Gemara, should write interpretations on the Gemara, should write books of halacha, should write books of study, of Torah study. It doesn't have to be with parchment, it doesn't have to be with the right kind of ink. Any form of writing books that a person can fulfill through that, the mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah. All right, nowadays that Baruch Hashem, we have the printing press, so the halachic codifiers write, you don't have to write the Sforim, you can purchase the Sforim. Through purchasing Sforim, through having books of Torah learning in one's possession and in one's home, one fulfills the final mitzvah of the Torah of writing a Sefer Torah. This is on a practical level, this is how we fulfill this particular mitzvah. Not the way the Torah, not the literal and simple way the Torah articulates it. All right, granted, but nevertheless, we buy Sforim and we study from them, and through this we fulfill the mitzvah of the final mitzvah of writing a Sefer Torah. Okay. What about the mitzvah of Hakel? The mitzvah of Hakel is a strange mitzvah, if you think about it, or a unique mitzvah, or I would add, a very difficult mitzvah to fulfill. Here the mitzvah was that there had to be a physical gathering of the entire Jewish nation once every 7 years, where they would stand up, in the Beis HaMikdash and listen to the king reading the Sefer Torah. Now, I want to challenge you, just for a moment, to try to picture the actual fulfillment of the mitzvah of Hakel. I believe it's safe to say that since the day the Jewish people left Mitzrayim, our numbers have never gone below at least 2 or 3 million Jews. I believe that's safe to say throughout Jewish history. I don't believe we've ever dipped below somewhere between 2 and 3 million Jews. Today, Baruch Hashem Kanai Nahora, we're talking about approximately 15 million Jews. So imagine just for a moment if we had to fulfill in some form the mitzvah of Hakel today. Please God, Mashiach will come. Will come soon. We'll have this mitzvah of Hakel once again. You're talking about collecting millions of Jews in one location. Now, first of all, think about in a physical sense, what type of gathering this is. I mean, how do you gather millions of Jews in one place? You know, the average shul has a hard time gathering 10 Jews into one place, let alone 20. By the time a shul has 35 members, there are already 10 of them that are talking about making a breakaway. Because, you try to get all the Jews physically into one place. Now, we're not just talking about men, we're not just talking about women, we're talking about men and women. And we're also talking about children. And the Torah, in articulating this mitzvah, when it comes to the mitzvah the mitzvah to bring children, uses the word taf. Taf, the Gemara explains, means any age children, even pitzalach, even newborn babies, if at all possible, were obligated to be brought to the Beis HaMikdash for the sake of the mitzvah of Hakel. So, challenge number 1 in the mitzvah of Hakel is, you got to get all the Jewish people together into one place, into one Beis HaMikdash. Then you got to have all the Jewish people agree on one king. Historically, among the Jewish people, that wasn't always the case. They didn't always agree on one king. That would take a miracle. That would take another. They all got to agree to one king. and one Kohen Gadol, who would then hand the king that Sefer Torah. The king would then open up the Sefer Torah and read large sections, large pieces of Chumash Dvarim. I mean, he would basically start off at the beginning of Chumash Dvarim, go all the way through into Parshas Vayelech until Shema. Then he would skip to Vahoya. All right, skip around a little bit. But you're talking about very large sections. Let's say you would take, I'm going to guess, let's say you would take an hour and a half. Could you imagine what that must be like to have millions of Jews with nothing to do other than all stand there while one king reads from a Sefer Torah? And noch, before the days of microphones, I don't even know if you could be Yotzei the mitzvah of Hakel with a king reading through a microphone. I don't know. It was fulfilled. The mitzvah of Hakel itself was fulfilled in the first day of Chol HaMoed Sukkos, if I remember correctly. So you're talking about perhaps on a day that you could use a microphone. Are you Yotzei, through the microphone? I don't know, Akasha. But even if yes, you'd have to have the sound system set up where all the Jewish people would come and they would hear the king read. And the question, of course, that the commentaries ask is, what's the purpose of this mitzvah? What for? I mean, just imagine kids crying. Imagine what type of infrastructure you would need. I mean, of course, I'm Jewish, so the first thing I think about is what kind of kiddush they would make after the king would finish reading from the Sefer Torah. I mean, could you imagine how many pots of cholent it would take to feed millions of Jews who would all come to Hakel to hear the king read the Sefer Torah? Could you imagine the sound of children crying as their parents try to comfort them, as everybody's standing there shuffling around, and the king, Soll sein gesund, reads from the Sefer Torah for hours? Can anybody learn anything in a scenario like this? What was the purpose of the mitzvah of Hakel? The Rambam articulates it best, if I dare say. The Rambam says the purpose of the mitzvah of Hakel, it was supposed to be a reenactment of Matan Torah. The Jews who were there, who were present when the king would read from the Sefer Torah, would imagine themselves standing at Har Sinai, and they would imagine the king as being the agent, the ambassador of the Rabbeinu Shloim himself, as he reads from the Sefer Torah, and the words of Hashem are heard by all the Jews. And for this reason, the Rambam writes something amazing. The Rambam says, the king who would read from the Sefer Torah wasn't necessarily the greatest scholar. He wasn't necessarily the biggest Talmid Chacham. There were Jews who would be present while the king would read from the Sefer Torah who were bigger Talmidei Chachamim than the king. And yet even they would have to stand with tremendous humility and listen to the king reading from the Sefer Torah. It was a reenactment of Matan Torah. It was at that moment the Jews came as close as they would ever come to the Matan Torah experience itself, where just as when they stood at Har Sinai, every Jew had to be present, men, women, and child, so it was with Hakel. They all had to be there. What did they learn? What did they actually academically discover at the experience of Hakel? Maybe not that much. Maybe some simple things. Doesn't matter. It wasn't the point of Hakel. Hakel wasn't a Shiur. Hakel was pardon the expression, Hakel was a religious experience. Hakel was supposed to be a time where the Jewish people would all get together and they would feel connected to Hashem as they would hear the king reading the words from the Torah. Hakel was a moment where they would all be imbued and infused with a real Yiras Shamayim. The Pasuk says, V'yoru es Hashem Elokeichem. They would fear Hashem. Hakel was a grand standing ceremony where the Jewish people would be reminded who they were, and they would come together in unity to celebrate their existence as Jews. Again, they didn't necessarily learn much, but the experience filled them with Yiras Hashem. And the Pasuk adds, the Pasuk says, if you pay attention to the words of the Pasuk says that it would imbue them with the fear of Hashem, Kol Hayomim, the rest of their life. Any Jew who experienced Hakel came as close as possible to the giving of the Torah, and the imprint, the impression of that experience would never leave them for the rest of their lives. Okay. 2 mitzvahs. Number 1, Hakel. Number 2, write a Sefer Torah. Hakel means gather together all the Jews, have a magical experience. Gather, let them all stand in the Beis HaMikdash. Let them watch the king. Let them hear the king make the brachas. Let them experience as much as possible, as close as possible, the type of godly revelation that took place at Matan Torah. Hakel was an overwhelmingly powerful feeling, a mitzvah, where they were filled with the feeling of fear of Hashem. Perhaps the word I'm looking for is an emotional experience. And then the final mitzvah, to write a Sefer Torah, which we understand to mean the mitzvah to actually study Torah, to master academically, to involve oneself with one's brain in the study of Torah for one's entire life. The last 2 mitzvahs that Moshe Rabbeinu gave the Jewish people. Okay, why? Why are these the last 2 mitzvahs that Moshe gave the Jews? Okay. Open your hearts, my dear friends. Put yourself for a moment in Moshe Rabbeinu's shoes. Or think about what the Torah is trying to convey to us with the final words of Moshe Rabbeinu. You see, here's what happened. Here's what happened. Or here's what's going on, at least as much as we can understand in the mind of Moshe, from the perspective of Moshe Rabbeinu. He's standing in the presence of somewhere between 2 and 3 million Jews. And he sees the challenge that the Jewish people are about to face. The challenge is this. These 2 to 3 million Jews, these are basically generally what we call shtetl yidalach. These are Jews who've grown up in the desert. They ate for breakfast, lunch, and dinner man that fell for them from the heavens. They drank water from the well of Miriam. Yes, true, this generation that was going into Eretz Yisrael, many of them were not yet born at the time of the giving of the Torah, and those that were born were very young. But at least they grew up in a generation where their fathers and mothers would put them on their lap as children and tell them about the story of Matan Torah that they themselves had experienced. Moshe looks at a generation of Jews who basically have never really known the struggles of life and who have grown up in an environment of holiness, purity, Torah, and Yiras Shamayim. Moshe Rabbeinu looks at the Jews, and for him the writing is on the wall. They're going to go into Eretz Yisrael, and the challenges, the difficulties of setting up a country, of setting up an economic system that would work, the challenges of living a mundane life and dealing with all the things that we have to deal with. Moshe knew it was going to catch them off guard and it was going to knock them off their feet. And he knew that the Jewish people's experience until this point, notwithstanding, their very spiritual and physical existence was in danger. As they went into Eretz Yisrael, a whole new Parsha would begin. A whole new story, a whole new challenge would begin. And everything that worked until now, everything that worked in the shtetl, everything that the Jewish people used until now to educate their children and to teach them to be Jews would need to change as soon as they came into Eretz Yisrael. The method and the form of education would need to be different, and it was necessary to do something to give them some kind of mitzvah or some kind of message that they could use that would always keep them connected to their roots, even as they faced a reality and a new world that they would not recognize. I may have mentioned to you in the past that as a child, I merited to meet a very special Jew who came to visit us in Johannesburg, South Africa. His name, may his soul rest in Gan Eden, his name was Professor Vayelech Green. A lot has been written about him and by him. Professor Vayelech Green was a Baal Tshuva. He was the term is a biochemist. He at one stage worked for NASA, doing some work on what type of plants could be grown in outer space or on different types of planets. A very wise and learned and very sort of academically brilliant man. And he spoke, he went around the Jewish world and spoke and taught about many interesting things. So I want to share something with you that I heard from him as a child that stuck with me. And with Hashem's help, I shall never forget it, because it's an analogy, I believe, for the issue that we're touching upon here. So Professor Green tells us that he for years he did work in NASA. He said one day they made a meeting in NASA, and the idea was that to draw up plans to send human beings to the nearest star. Okay? Now, the nearest star, according to my memory of Professor Green's presentation from when I was a child, this goes back about 30 years ago, the nearest star would take a rocket ship 800 years to get to. So if it leaves Earth in 2020, it's going to get to the nearest star in 2820, approximately. Okay. So in order to do that, we have a couple of challenges, right? Number one, you got to make a rocket ship that's going to be able to travel for 800 years. Ain't shy. Number two, you need to design a system, Now, number three, the question is, who are we going to put on this rocket ship that's going to live for 800 years? Who's going to survive that kind of a journey, 800 years? So they're thinking, what are we going to do? How are we going to get, nobody lives that long. How are we going to get human beings to the nearest star if it takes 800 years to get there? So in NASA, they had an idea. Hermit Cup. They said, you know what we're going to do? We're not going to put one person on this rocket ship. We're going to put a community on the rocket ship. Maybe, I don't know how many, I'm making this up, maybe 20 families, right? And the rocket ship will also have a shadchan, maybe 2 shadchanim. And with time, the children who will grow up on the rocket ship will be matched up with each other. And Yankel will marry Baruch, or Stephen will marry Rachel, and they then will get married and have children on the rocket ship. We'll put a doctor on there who will teach them how to take care of themselves and of each other medically. We'll put 2 rabbis on the rocket ship so that you can have 2 shuls, because that's very important. I'm just kidding. We'll give them the ability, we'll give these people the ability to have children, and for these children to procreate on this rocket ship. And so even after 120, when the generation of humans who got onto the rocket from planet Earth, even after they have passed, their children who were either born or came onto the rocket ship as children will then perpetuate the mission. And their children will teach their children, and their children will teach theirs. And so it is, this can be perpetuated until it can last for 800 years, until we can get to the nearest star. And then once we get there, they can send us back the information, and we can send the rocket ship back for another 800 years. Once again, following the same system, where generation after generation will be born on this rocket ship, teach it to their children, They'll teach their children how to operate the rocket. They'll teach their children how to communicate with the human beings on Earth. They'll teach their children how to grow food as they travel. And they'll teach their children how to perpetuate this mission. All right, my guess is that it was a largely theoretical discussion, but this is what I heard from the professor. As they're sitting and talking about it, listen to this. As they're sitting and talking about it, one of the individuals around the table says there's a problem. What's the problem? With time, they said, at some point, perhaps 3, 4, 5, 10 generations into it, the children who will be born after multiple generations of being on this rocket will begin to doubt the entire story. Their parents will say to them, young Yankele, I want you to know we had an Elter Zayda who got onto this rocket from planet Earth. We're on a mission here from an organization, from a company called NASA, to collect information from the star to planet Earth, where millions, billions of human beings are waiting to hear from us the information that we're going to collect from the stars. And at some point, they realized the story would begin to sound too far-fetched. Children growing up on the rocket ship would say to their parents, my dear parents, did you ever see planet Earth? No, we didn't. Did your parents ever see planet Earth? No. How about your grandparents? Did you ever see anybody who claims to have seen planet Earth? No. So what is this, the children would say? Just a story Vasmat Geyarshin that we inherited from 16 generations ago. What kind of nonsense is this? Somewhere on the rocket ship, they would open an Ivy League university where their professors would teach the children and the students not to believe the nonsense tales that their ancestors had told them. Superstitious garbage, they would say. And when the children would ask, how does this rocket ship work? With whom are we communicating over the radio? At some point, the enlightened people on the rocket ship would say, this is nature. This is how it works. This is how it always worked, and this is how it always will work. We're not on some mission going from somewhere, going to somewhere. Forget the old wives' tales. Forget the Baba Mises. Embrace the reality. And besides, who says you even have to communicate with the radio the way we're told to? We can do whatever we want. Time to throw away the old beliefs of nonsense. In other words, NASA realized that it would be incredibly difficult to perpetuate the mindset among children after children, generation after generation, who would be born in this reality on the rocket and never have seen or known anything else. It would become incredibly difficult to perpetuate that mindset where these children would understand that they're on a mission from planet Earth. 800 years, NASA said, 800 years is too long for human beings to hold on to a story that they heard from their ancestors when they have no proof and where they can't see the reality of what they're being told. You hear this, my friends? And so NASA, because of that, scrapped the mission. They said there's no way to imbue a system of education. There's no way to teach people something in such a way that they'll hold on to it for 800 years if we have no physical contact with them. Once we've sent them away in the rocket, we cannot control them. We cannot count on them holding on to this story for 800 years. At some point, they'd reject it, and the entire mission would be endangered. The story stuck in my head because of the way Professor Green, of course, explained the nimshal of the story. But I want to apply it to our Parsha and to the two mitzvahs of Hakel and studying Torah. Moshe looks at the Jewish people who are about to go into Eretz Yisrael. They're about to go off on this rocket ship, so to speak. that will last, that will go on for thousands of years. And he looks at the Jews and he thinks to himself, Rabbeinu Shalom, we're only one generation away from the giving of the Torah. The children who are going into Eretz Yisrael, this next generation, many of them have never seen it. And we're already struggling. How do we do this? How do we equip the Jews with the tools, with the means, with the armor that they need to last, not for 800 years, but for 3,500 years? How are we going to do this? What difference does it make, says Moshe Rabbeinu, how many miracles these people saw? What difference does it make that they saw and heard Hashem himself say to them on top of the mountain, Anochi Hashem Elokecha? If that's all in the past, if that's all behind us, how are we going to equip the Jews with the tools they need to keep this going? Moshe fears that as the Jews go into Eretz Yisrael, the battles that they face, the challenges, the ways of the world will engulf them and threaten their spiritual existence. Moshe Rabbeinu was afraid of the Enlightenment movement that was headed down the pipelines, where at some point Jews would turn to their children or children would turn to their parents and say, you're selling us a story from thousands of years ago, genug. I heard the story so many times. Can't we move on? Don't you have any other stories? The same story again and again. How is that story relevant to me today? Even NASA couldn't figure out the answer to this question. But Moshe Rabbeinu did. And the answer consists of what we call a 1-2 punch. 2 mitzvahs. Number 1, the mitzvah of Hakel. And number 2, write a Sefer Torah. And here there are 3 ways of explaining, 3 ideas in the comparison between these 2 mitzvahs. Number 1, Moshe Rabbeinu said every 7 years, I want you to gather the entire Jewish nation together. And once every 7 years, all the Jewish people together will have a moment of inspiration. They will have a moment of elevation that is so powerful, it's as close as it comes to Matan Torah. On a simple level, what he was saying is, there's power in numbers. Let the Jewish children see that their parents and the entire generation and everybody gets together and all together proclaim in the presence of the king, listen in the presence of the king to the same words of the Torah being read. Number 1, let's do our best to reenact as well as we can the story of Matan Torah. Let's remember, let's not just tell the story, let's dramatize the story, let's enact it, let's like those people on Pesach night, I believe it's a Sephardic custom. They put sacks on their back, they put bags over their shoulders, and they literally walk around the table. Let's reenact this as much as we physically can, so that the past is brought to life as much as it could be. That's 1. And then number 2, Moshe Rabbeinu said, and then when that's over, sit down and study Torah. There, when that's done, when you've had the reenactment, sit down and study, take books. There used to be a Yiddish expression that says, if you drop gold and you drop books, pick up the books first. Nowadays, I should interrupt myself here for a minute. Nowadays, it's very difficult. It's becoming more and more difficult to appreciate the value that people gave to physical books. And by the way, for the sake of this part of the discussion, I don't only mean Torah books for sure, but even books in general. The value that people gave to books, the care that people had for books was incredible. It's being lost today because everything is become available. Most of the time you don't need books, right? Baruch Hashem, we have Shabbos. Baruch Hashem, we have Shabbos where you can't access the internet until the rabbis come up with a special Shabbos app. Until that point, so we have to have books for Shabbos and Yom Tov, Baruch Hashem, right? Thank God. But during the week, forget it. Who needs books today? But in this case, when Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Jews, want you to write a Sefer Torah, as the commentaries explain, he's not telling them to write a Sefer Torah. He's telling them to study. Go open a Chumash, go open a Mishnah, go open a Gemara, go open a Rambam, a Rashba, a Shulchan Aruch. Go learn. When you learn, you'll find it meaningful and you'll find it significant. It will come to life. You know, some Jews love inspiration. Some Jews love inspiration. Some Jews, these are Jews that typically, they love nigunim, they love songs. They love anything that will make them feel elevated and holy and pure. They love, perhaps, let's call it, they love the emotional element of Yiddishkeit. These Jews can not necessarily be turned on by the academics of Yiddishkeit. These are typically warm and passionate, excited Jews, right? These are the kinds of Jews that love to go to Uman, for example, on Rosh Hashanah, where tens of thousands, not this year, but other years, tens of thousands of Jews put their arms around each other's shoulders in the streets, and they sing and they cry and they experience something fantastic. It's uplifting. It's very, very powerful. Some Jews are very turned on by that. Those Jews often, or typically, stereotypically, are not as excited when it comes to learning, perhaps, difficult passages in academics. They're not so excited about that. Other Jews, the opposite. Give them a Blat Gemara, poof, off they go. They love it. They'll go back and forth, the questions and the answers. They love the academics. Tell them, you want to go to Uman, where you'll stand in the streets and put your arms around each other's shoulders and sing at 3 o'clock in the morning? They don't see the point in that. Some educators love to educate with emotion. Some educators love to educate with intellect. Some teachers tell their students, it's important to feel connected to Hashem. Some educators tell their students it's important to study Torah and understand understand this academically. Typically, one side can be dismissive of the other. One side will say, you have to feel, you have to develop a relationship with Hashem. What good is it to study Gemara if you don't have a relationship with Hashem? And the other side will say, you have to study, otherwise you're ignorant. And if you're ignorant, you're a fool. Doesn't make a difference how nicely you sing. Who's right? Of course. Of course. They're both right. You need both. And so Moshe Rabbeinu gave the Jews 2 mitzvahs. He gave them the mitzvah of Hakel, where the Jews would come together and be inspired and get turned on and be excited like no other time during the year or during history. And he gave them the mitzvah of studying Torah. But here there is, I think, a third very important point. Again, why Moshe Rabbeinu gives the Jews 2 mitzvahs of Hakel and studying Torah. Perhaps Moshe was telling the Jews this. You know, he said to the Jews, Jewish history will have many different faces. There will be times that can be compared to the mitzvah of Hakel, where the Jews will get together, they will celebrate. They will be in the Beis HaMikdash in the happiest Yom Tov of the year on Sukkot. They will dance all night. The Gemara says anybody who didn't see the happiness and the joy of Simchas Beis HaSheva hasn't seen happiness and joy in their life. Jewish history will have highs, the likes of which are unprecedented. There will be times when millions of Jews will gather together in spiritual ecstasy, and they will sing and scream and cry together. And there will be a king, one king, who will rule over the entire nation. And even the biggest Talmidei Chachamim will sit and listen to the way he reads from the Torah. There will be moments of joy and ecstasy and celebration and jubilation and beautiful moments in Jewish history, represented by Hakel, where it will seem as if everything is as it should be. And all the Jewish people are committed and united and stand shoulder to shoulder in the same Beis HaMikdash. And then there are the lows. There are times where Jewish people will be unable to gather, dispersed. The Beis HaMikdash, may Hashem protect us, will be destroyed. And the Jewish people will be exiled all over the place. And all the grandiose and grandeur, and all of the bells and whistles will all be gone. Everything in a moment disappeared. And instead of millions of Jews gathering together in the Beis HaMikdash, it'll be difficult to pull together a minyan in some hole somewhere. And the Jewish people will feel like they're desperate for survival. And Moshe Rabbeinu looks at the Jews in the last day of his life and says, I'm going to give you 2 mitzvahs. And as long as you can hold on to both, you'll be fine. Holding on to both means this. Holding on to both means that when you are at the peak and at the zenith, and when everything seems fantastic and stupendous, and you feel invincible, and you want to scream together with millions of Jews, Am Yisrael Chai, because we're so powerful that nobody can touch us. At those moments when you're in the middle of the mitzvah of Hakel, remember that it doesn't, until Mashiach comes, it won't stay that way. And you may find yourself soon enough locked up at home, alone, with your own Sefer Torah, and nobody there with you. Even at the peak of your excitement, remember to be committed. Remember that it's going to take grit and gut to stick through the difficult times. And even if Rahman al-Itzlan, Chas v'Sholom, you find yourself alone, take out the Sefer Torah and read from it in exactly the way the king is doing today. No difference. The mitzvah of studying Torah remains. The candle of Jewish history, the torch, the teachings of Moshe Rabbeinu can be perpetuated, must be perpetuated, and will be perpetuated, even if you find yourself alone. And if you do, Rahman al-Itzlan, find yourself alone. Find yourself sitting in quarantine. And all you have is your own Sefer Torah. Nobody's there with you. Remember that there's also a mitzvah of Hakel. Remember that this too shall pass. This too is temporary. And one day the Jewish people will all gather together in the Beis HaMikdash once again. Millions of Jews will stand shoulder to shoulder. The inspiration will be as great as it can be. It will feel like Matan Torah all over again. And the Jews will once again be united under one and the same king. It was Moshe Rabbeinu's way of telling the Jews, Jewish history will have highs and lows. There will be Hakel moments, and there will be alone Sefer Torah moments. I'm going to give you 2 mitzvahs because either one is not sufficient. If you're a Hakel Jew, you do fantastic when you're surrounded by thousands of other Jews and the inspiration is on fire. You do great. What about when the inspiration disappears? You're left with nothing. And if you're a Torah learning Jew who just wants to sit alone and study Torah, if you're the kind of Jew who says, leave me alone, I don't want to participate in Hakel, I just want to sit alone and study, that's not sufficient too. That's not sufficient either, excuse me. In order to make this work, in order to teach it to the children so that they remember to fear Hashem, Kol Hayomim, you need to reenact Hakel. You need Hakel to reenact the giving of the Torah. You need to gather the Jews and remind them that Hashem gave us the Torah as one together on one very inspirational moment at the foot of Mount Sinai. Why do I say this? I think the lesson here is so obvious. The Shiur practically concludes itself. If you would have come to any of us last year, Rosh Hashanah, last year Yom Kippur, as we stood, hundreds of Jews gathered together in shuls. In some shuls, thousands of Jews together. Without a care in the world about contagious diseases, Rahman al-Islam. If you would come to us last year and say to us, enjoy the Hakel, enjoy the gathering of Jews, enjoy spending Yom Kippur with hundreds of other Jews, enjoy walking in the street without concern, enjoy the inspiration for next year. It will be gone. Tremendous precaution will have to be taken in order for Jews to daven together in a minyan. If you would have told that to me last year, Rosh Hashanah, I would have thought you were nuts. We weren't going anywhere. What do you mean? We were safe and we were secure and we were strong. Every year, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, for the past God knows how many years, Jews gather together in shul and daven by the hundreds, by the thousands. Shuls sell seats and count on the money they make from it to help their budget all year long. Are you kidding me? Which Jew doesn't go to shul on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur? Everybody goes. It's Hakel. The shofar is blown. Yizkar is said. Kol Nidre is recited. We scream Shema Yisrael at the end of Yom Kippur. Which Jew doesn't go to shul for Shema Yisrael at the end of Yom Kippur? It's so inspirational. It's such a powerful moment. Everybody wants to be there. Boom. Gone. Instead, replaced with a terrifying pandemic. Pikuach nefashos. And so now we're struggling. Shuls will be, according to an article I read yesterday, shuls gatherings will be, on average, barely 10% of what they were last year. There are times when there's no hakel. So what do we do then? Some of us will be alone Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, remaining at home. To save our lives, to protect our health, we have to stay at home. What do we do then? You know what you do then? You pull out the other mitzvah. The other mitzvah says you're alone. Take out a Sefer Torah. Take out a Siddur. Take out a Chumash. This may be the year when you have to daven alone. This may be the year when you have to hear the shofar blowing alone. We do our best. We can perpetuate Yiddishkeit. We can perpetuate Torah mitzvahs. We can perpetuate the teachings of Moshe Rabbeinu in the presence of thousands and millions of Jews or in the presence of one Jew. We're not scared. We're not threatened. We're not fearful that the golden chain will be broken. No way. Please God, soon, please God, next year, Rosh Hashanah, we'll be back to the Hakel version where we can gather by the hundreds and by the thousands. Please God. But even if not, we're equipped. We will look at our children and our students and we will say to them, whether you spend Rosh Hashanah with 100,000 Jews or whether you spend Rosh Hashanah alone, either way, it's Rosh Hashanah. And either way, God's books of life are open. And either way, Hashem judges us and determines. Either way, we have to ask ourselves, what are we going to do to make this year better? Either way, it's Rosh Hashanah. We're not dependent on one or the other. Yes, please God, as soon as it's safe, we'll go back to gatherings. I hope the gatherings will be even bigger than they were before. Please God, we'll go back to the Hakel. But it doesn't threaten us. In order to make Yiddishkeit last 3,500 years plus tax, in order for Moshe Rabbeinu to give the Jews something that they could hold on to till the coming of Mashiach and beyond, he gave them both mitzvahs. Celebrate it in public when you can. Gather together in public when you can. Celebrate by the hundreds, by the thousands, by the millions when you can. Stand in the Beis HaMikdash in the presence of the King and hear the voice of Hashem when you can. And when you can't, because there's no Beis HaMikdash, and there's no King, and there's no Kohen Gadol, and even shuls in which we gather in small groups, even those have to take tremendous precaution, and in many cases, many Jews have to remain alone. It's the same Rosh Hashanah. It's the same Torah. It's the same Yom Kippur. It's the same Moshe Rabbeinu. Rosh Hashanah is not any less holy this year than it was last year. And it won't be any more holy next year than it will be this year. It's the same Yom Tov. It's the same Yom Tov that Jews kept in Auschwitz and in Bergen-Belsen. It's the same Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur that Jews celebrated in their highs and in their lows, in wealth and in poverty, in sickness and in health, in affluence and in Rahman al-Islam, even in the midst of a pandemic. It's the same. It's the same Shema Yisrael. It's the same Yiddish Neshama. It's the same Jewish education. It's the same values. The shofar sounds the same. It's the same Moshe Rabbeinu and the same 613 mitzvahs. What Moshe Rabbeinu told the Jews on the last day of his life, I'm not giving you something that is subject to the whims of change. I'm not giving you something that will last for this amount of time and for that amount of time. I'm not giving you something that is subject that will be threatened by some chacham in some Ivy League university who thinks he's discovered America. I'm giving you something that's eternal. Remember these two mitzvahs, they represent the two opposite extremes. And everything in between can be carried and can be swept up through that. May Hashem bless us all with a good, sweet year. For those of you who will be spending Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur alone, I wish you a good Kibbutz Shiur. Please let me know if you need help with the hearing of the shofar. I will come to your home, not into your home. I will stand in your yard. You can open the window. Be happy to blow shofar for you. For those of you who will be davening in backyard minyanim, don't get too comfortable with your backyard minyanim, because please God, soon we'll be back and we need your membership. For those who will be davening in shul, please make sure you take the right precaution to keep everybody safe. Hashem bless us all with a good Kibbutz Shiur, a ksiva v'chasima tova, lashana tova.